Good morning, everybody. This Scrutiny Committee meeting is being live streamed on a hybrid basis in accordance with the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021, which will operate alongside the Council's standing orders. The Council's standing orders and code of conduct are heard at all times, and members should conduct themselves accordingly. The recorded version of this meeting will be uploaded for public viewing as soon as possible after the meeting, and a Welsh translation of the proceedings can be provided upon request. Images and sound recordings may be also used for training purposes within the council. Okay, let's begin. Do we have any apologies this morning?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Davis.
And you said the councillor may and may be late. Yes. Do we have any declarations of interest, members? Then can we go then to the minutes of the previous meeting? We'll start with page 3. And then just page 4. Are there any matters arising from those minutes? Okay, can I have a proposer then to accept the minutes? Thank you, Deb. And a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you. Excellent. Moving on. Okay, so the first report is Key Stage 4 Outcomes Report. So, who's presenting?
Cabinet member would like to do an introduction.
Yes,
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be with you today with officers to present the 2024 Key Stage 4 outcomes. Schools have been anonymised, as this is not about us comparing our schools, as each of them has their own context in relation to deprivation and access to opportunities. Please be assured each school understands their own data and have already used this to consider carefully whether this marries with their own target setting and performance indicators. It's important to remember that every cohort is different, just as every child is unique. But what we all want is for these young people to have fulfilled or exceeded expectations. Schools know this, and this is where the hard scrutiny and reflections have already taken place. Please be assured that the RLEA education team meet regularly with our secondary schools to ensure that an analysis of outcomes is carefully evaluated. Today's figures will provide you some context of how schools are measured within their plans of schools in regards to levels of deprivation with their own communities. And this helps us to understand whether outcomes are where we want them to be. This is as well as the school's performance when compared with the Welsh Government's outcomes. As the paper states, the majority of our 8 English medium secondary schools are in the most socioeconomic disadvantaged half. It's inescapable that with disadvantage comes inequality of opportunity. What all of us have to do in our roles as councillors and as an LA is to work hard in all our schools to reduce economic disadvantage by raising aspiration, enabling opportunities and ensuring equality provision. This is what is important today when we consider this data.
thank you. Any comments on the cabinet member's statement there? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. There's nothing else I'd like to add because I know that that Scrutiny Committee are fully aware that we shouldn't be using the data to date to make comparisons with schools compared to each other, and that there are unintended consequences to data releases, and it is to be used for self-evaluation purposes and to guide the improvement journey. So I will pass over to Ed, who'd like to do an introduction in terms of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah. I understand Scrutiny Committee members. Yes, I can see you presenting. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Lovely. A brief 10-slide presentation, which gives an introduction to this paper, because, as has been said, the difficult part in comparing schools is to do it fairly. It's not as simple as the league tables of old, but it does add to the complexity of the data that is there. On the next slide, you will have a reminder that data came in. If you press the right button,
Here we go.
Lovely. So in terms of the context, it's only in 2023 that these measures were reintroduced. It was the March of that year that the then minister introduced them. Leave it on that slide, it's fine, I'll just verbally go through the first one. And again, that data being published in 2024. To allow us to have some data on secondary schools. The slide that you've got in front of you now, I know it is very small, but the key elements for you within Newport and for us within Newport are the schools highlighted in blue. The list on the left-hand side, you will see a red line dividing them, is 6 Welsh medium families. I'll explain how schools put in these families in a moment, but basically every school is ranked along a range of factors, a number of socio-economic factors. You will see Ysgol Government Wentyscoed in blue at the top of the list in Welsh medium family number 1, which is the most socio-economically disadvantaged family in Wales. That does not mean it compares with the English medium schools to the right-hand side of the line, the red line, but you will then see all the English medium schools in Newport highlighted in blue. From family number 7, the most socioeconomically disadvantaged, to family number 21, the least. So it's 3 columns, but it's 1 column really, if that makes sense, but I couldn't really fit them on a slide like that. You will see the bulk of Newport schools towards the most socioeconomically disadvantaged end of families in schools, but then 1 in the middle and 2 towards the top. And that reflects the picture that colleagues were referring to about the impact that can have on our schools. That's the only place where you'll see schools named in this report. So on the next slide, this is how the families are determined. They're determined by a range of data. You will see that the top one, the keywords there highlighted in slightly emboldened, 50% is based on the proportion of pupils eligible for free school meals, 30% on WIM, the Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation, which I'm sure you're familiar with, based on where the learners actually live, 10% for those on SEN, quite small proportions relatively, and 10% for those new to the English as additional language. Those are all melded together, calculated together, and the family split. So what it does mean, the schools who have high proportions of EL pupils, English as an additional language, are not all grouped together. It mixes them up, but it gives a general index. On the next page, and then those families are compared together, you have the measures that Welsh Government use. The 5 headline measures, they're all points-based, which I'll come on to on the next slide. Cap 9 being the main headline measure, the best 9 qualifications of a learner. Many years ago, you could enter many more qualifications, but it was felt that that was too many for our learners. Literacy, numeracy, science, and the Welsh Baccalaureate, which I'll come on to later. You do then have some additional information about things like A stars to A, so higher performance levels, the gaps between FSM learners, and results are then modelled against Welsh Government, which I'll come on to on a slide in a moment as well, and the thirds. So on the next slide, a very simplistic view of how points work. The actual document that works these out in schools is probably about 100 pages long to calculate what points are worth what for what qualifications. However, on the left-hand side for GCSEs, you will see that a grade C is worth 40 points. A level 2 A star is worth 58 points. In the past, schools were encouraged to and almost measured on how they got pupils to get C's and above. Therefore, that link between D and C was what was important. Perhaps if learners were getting B's, they may be left alone. I'm not saying that happened university and it really didn't, but the focus wasn't on every learner. What this points-based system does is allow the focus of maximising points for every learner, so every grade matters, if that makes sense. On the right-hand side, you've got the vocational factored across, and those points matter and factor into it as well to different levels. One of the most important grades and gaps there, I haven't actually put on there, but if you don't get a qualification, you get 0 points. If you get a G, you get 16 points. So actually the biggest leap for our learners is to get a basic qualification, which is what our schools are focus upon doing for all of our learners. It also, we know that if learners get some qualifications, their life chances are considerably enhanced.
Could I just ask you one thing? Doesn't this sort of make the vocational training less attractive, and at the points, the distinction on vocation is quite a hard thing to get, and you're only getting 34 points, but that's the same as a D in a GCSE. How can that possibly be right?
Two factors there. That's for a single volume qualification on vocational. Some of them are double, some of them are even triple the value. So that 34 would be multiplied by 2 or 3 for the points that are there. I think the second point is that's where it relies on the professionalism of our teachers and leaders in schools to be saying, these are the right qualifications for the learners, these are where they can achieve, rather than perhaps having a lower NG for 16 points. It would be better than to have a higher level vocational.
So it's like, CCSEs and GCSEs.
It's about our teachers knowing our learners and keeping at heart what's best for the learners, not the points really, but the points that they're in the background.
Yeah, schools are measured on the points, aren't they? And that's what's important here. So if enough children are not doing the GCSE.
But the school's got their own analysis and their own story, and what you're not doing is comparing the schools.
No, we're not comparing. I
Yeah,
just say
yeah,
that
yeah.
it's more advantageous for the schools to push towards the GCSE because of the points are higher than it is to go elsewhere.
This might help. This might help. The next slide might help on this. Yeah, if that's okay. So if we go on to the next slide on the Cap 9. I think it might be because you're not on the presentation window.
It's probably driving in fairness.
There
you go.
Lovely, thank you. So up until 2018, you had a Cap 9 model which had 5 qualifications which were fixed. You can see them there at the top: Welsh or English language, 2 maths, 2 science, and then freedom, for want of a better word, in the other 4 qualifications to enter learners into whatever they was right for them. The 2019 model, which is the same as the one now, actually gives far more flexibility in that 2/3 of the model, there is flexibility to enter for the vocational. But, and I think this is important, there is still that core there that you have to do a literacy-based GCSE, have to do a numeracy, have to do a science, because those are important for life chances ultimately. So for me, I think that balance is right now. I think the challenge for our schools is actually to use the other 6 more flexibly for the resources they have, the teachers they have, to be on what can we do in the qualification space that is right for each individual learner. And that's where our colleagues in LA, my colleagues in the AS as well, challenge schools to be saying, have you got the right diet that suits our learners? Okay, this is now, that's the context elements. Just a couple of slides on the Welsh Government modelled expectation. We can go on to that one, and you can go on past that one. It is worth saying, though, that the school packs are 120 pages long, so they're quite voluminous and complex in the data they have. But I'm just showing you a couple of slides. It's a little bit small on there. I mentioned free school meals earlier, and the graph on the left basically has 10 schools in the family of that school. The pink dot is your school. The other 10 blue dots are your family scattered around you. You will see that the family are very similar. They group together left to right on free school meals. So that free school meals factors into it. The line through the middle of them is if there are another 200 dots there for every single school in Wales. What you will notice is, and this is a fact sadly on socioeconomic disadvantage, as the percentage of free school meal increases, performance of schools gradually goes down. That's a challenge for us to overcome. It's not as significant as one might imagine, because if you look at the points, they're all between 300 and 400 points on average. So what you're doing as that school is comparing 2 things there. You're going to say, where are we compared with the family? Are we one of the lower dots at the bottom? Or are we in the middle where we'd expect to be or above? And where are we compared with the line? I have put a particularly boring example there that is smack in the middle of the family and smack on the line. So exactly where you'd expect. But what that does, the majority of schools, middle 80%, will be roughly on the line. what we're looking for when we have professional dialogues with schools is outliers to say, why are we lower in that area? What's the rationale behind it? What's the story? And that can only really happen at school level, not when you aggregate it up, unfortunately. You have got all the numbers on the right-hand side as well. But when I say measured against Welsh Government modelled outcomes, it is sophisticated as that. How far are you above or below the line? That above the below the line gets even more complex at the next slide. In that, they do it for thirds. So if you imagine you've got 150 learners in a cohort, the performance of the top 50 is averaged out. And that is, I can't even name the colour of the dot, but it's the darker blue dot at the top. And then you've got the middle third, which is the yellow dot. And then you've got the bottom third, which is another purpley dot at the bottom. You've then got the families scattered around you. The one thing that strikes me on this chart, if you're comparing where you're doing for your thirds, are you, is there one third that's out of kilter and below? The three that you've got there, in terms of the differences, you'll notice the top third, there's not a lot of variance. The middle third, there's not a lot of variance. The lower third, there's quite a lot of variance. That's the same for many families. What I think it points to is that schools make the biggest difference for our most socioeconomically disadvantaged learners. This is the greatest variance. That's just the final one I wanted to talk about before going on to give you a feel for the data before going to the report, Chair.
Right, so team members have any questions or points they wish to raise on that? Kevin will laugh. It's hard.
I got one question, Chair, and that's, are English schools based on the same as this?
Oh, sorry, English as in England?
Yes.
No.
Right.
A very different system where GCSEs are graded slightly differently. There's comparability between them. There's comparability when it moves to A level for university purpose, which is, I think, is the important point. But at this stage, no.
So how do we compare English schools to most schools?
Don't really compare with anybody else.
So how can we gain good working practices by education authorities in England and bring them into Wales, and vice versa? How do we transfer good practices from Welsh teachers and Welsh education authorities to English, because we got no comparison on how to do it. Where are we
It's
financing
not
it?
possible to see good practice from the UK and actually wider than the UK. We can look at international research and practice as well. But what we do know is that there is enough there is adequate descriptions of good practice and good practice case studies through Eston, for instance. Eston provides excellent opportunities and plentiful opportunities to describe many themes within and across schools at all the different ages and stages to be able for us to acquire and visit those schools. There's no shortage.
To add in, one of the examples that we developed during COVID and during the lockdowns was working with an Australian local education authority and a professor there, because there was the time to do it, virtual working, to take a lot of the lessons there. The data isn't necessarily the important part there, it's the practices on the ground that you're sharing between teachers. That's still possible.
I think that professionally as well, what we know is that our education workforce and leaders want to see contextual practice as well. That's why we have the partner schools approach as well. So they'd like to be able to see how another secondary school is doing particularly well within literacy skills and English, and how they're acquiring higher GCSE results and higher Cat9 scores.
Is it the same family?
But within the same family, certainly, or even locally, we can make sure that we're matching practice across the local authority. It's important we look wider than just local authority, but our partner schools work together then on all levels. It's not just head teacher to head teacher and senior leader to senior leader. It's also classroom practitioner to classroom practitioner, so that it really is authentic. There's opportunities for learning books, to do observations, to look at books. So you're getting the insight into that working practice, and that's really celebrated in Wales and locally as well.
I got two other questions, Jay. The free school meals slide prior to that one. No, that one. In fact, kid chart example was taken from 2019. So that's 5 years. How we fixed
Right.
in regards to 2023, 24, 25.
Sorry, I'm not showing the data here. It just happens to be the first time those came out. So I've got that model when it was. It's
Right.
just as a demonstration. It's not the data that's 2019.
That's not the relevant
No.
data. What concerns do you have in regards to viewing the data and the actual teachers in front of the children? How are we actually going to improve that to get better results? And what are the teachers and head teachers aware of the data which is there?
It would be an expectation that every teacher looks at their data and their range of assessment and their range of evidence to demonstrate pupil progress. They'd be looking at both external outcomes at the end of Key Stage 4. They'd be looking at continual assessment in their subject area over a number of years. They'd be looking at baseline entry information into a secondary school. Sometimes that looks as CAT scores, that's reading scores, to see how they can improve pupils' acquisition of skills, for instance. They'd be looking at their books to be able to demonstrate progress of learners. They'd be doing the learning walks to be able to visualise learners, be giving appropriate answers, etc. So there'd be a full range of evidence that they'd be looking at, but we would also expect at the secondary school level for every department to have an action plan where they've really critically looked at all of their assessment data, their triangulation of evidence, and to look at their strengths and for their areas of development. And then an action plan would follow where they would be working on next steps to improve, and they would be looking at an impact report on a termly basis to see if indeed those actions to encourage improvement within the department have made a difference to learners. And that would be collated across the secondary school, and you would hope that that would bring about positive change and improvement. The local authority tracks that through professional discussions with each head teacher and chair governors as well. And we would expect our school improvement partners that are assigned to each school to be giving updates around, for instance, monitoring and evaluation practices, where the school is particularly improved. When the school has drawn up their priorities based on all of their triangulation of evidence and their data, if there is a difference in the way that they're working and how they've come to those priorities. So it's the consistent dialogue across the system that enables us to know that a school is securing their improvement journey.
The other question is, Chair, a few years ago, had a number of schools which were special measures. Are there any schools at the moment that could, in the near future, be ending up in special measures?
I cannot predict the judgment of magistrates and inspectorates, but the model that we operate means that some schools will receive higher levels of support than others.
That's what I was getting at.
Just to add that on this data, estimate secondary level use this data far, far less than they did in the past. What they are very much interested in is the quality of teaching and learning in the classroom, and the quality of leadership in schools as well, rather than this data. This is just a tiny part of the way they would form a judgment.
Thank you, Sarah. I wanted to know about the support.
It's there.
Have you finished?
Chris,
Stephen?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair, to come in. So mine is just a question of 2 points linked in with what we've discussed so far. The first one is about the accessibility of vocational subjects in relation to that, including with those entitled to FSM, because obviously there is potential costings that go behind that might be prohibitive, you know, in terms of transport tools or whatever else that the young people might need in order to fulfil that, and about how to access those. I suppose I take on board what was noted about FSM on this graph being minimal, taken into consideration. I think my kind of mindset when this was being discussed was looking at kind of more effectiveness about where a young person, a young individual starts off on their educational journey to where they come out of it the other end, and what successful outputs you know have been had. So what qualifications have they had? I don't think that quantifies within what we see here. I'm just wondering, is there a bit more kind of specific information / data that can specify how well the schools are performing in terms of this is where the young person has started in terms of, you know, they've had developmental challenges, there might be ACEs, they might have, you know, ALN needs, and then this is their outcome at the end. And is that more taken on board more as part of the kind of way that the school is looked upon in terms of their educational journey?
Is that that now, or is that covered further in the report?
I can cover that now rather than it being covered now.
Fine, yeah.
If I come to your second question first, Councillor, I think in terms of the data, that would traditionally have been called value-added data, where we'd have measured the progress of learners within a school from a point in time to a point now, and seen whether it was better than expected or not as expected. Given the current systems we have, given at end of foundation phase as well as end of key stage 2, that fixed data is no longer available. There is no starting point for that, what was known as Welsh Government value added or modelled data, to be available anymore. What is vitally important, and this is the key part of your question, I feel, is that schools would know those journeys that those learners are on, measure, track, evaluate qualitatively the difference that has been made. In terms of a paper like this, though, it is not possible to aggregate that data up from thousands of learners across the city to a paper, unfortunately, but that work is very much going on within our schools. In terms of your first point on qualifications and accessibility of qualifications, there is currently a reform going on through Qualifications Wales with WJC heavily involved to introduce a broad range of qualifications to change, where there is consultation with the profession ongoing.
What's on now?
And
Somebody's on,
What is
got
it?
their mic on.
and what I would suggest, members, it may be possible for a colleague of mine to come back and update you on the qualifications changes if you felt that would be valuable, to update you on the full detail of the changes that are taking place there in the future, because I think it's large enough to be a separate item to this.
That's fine, yeah. Stephen, any other?
Not at this point, Chair. Thank you very much, and happy to have that at a future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members wish to comment? Councillor Harvey, is it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. None of us are daft. We're all governors. We know where our schools are, or we should know where our schools are. But what about the children on FSM? Because they're never going to get a leafy area is always going to score better, for want of a better phrase, than a more socially deprived area. So the children in the more socially deprived area is going to get left behind, because they're never going to match those in the leafy suburbs, if that makes sense.
I think our schools have aspirations for every single one of our learners, regardless of the 3 school meals designation or not. It is unfortunate, perhaps, that we do use 3 school meals as a proxy indicator of deprivation. So it can blur the picture that we think we are treating those learners differently. As individuals, we're not. And as individuals, we're certainly not putting any class ceiling on the achievement that any FSM learner can make. It is just that research shows that where a school has a higher proportion, they are likely to perform less well. That's something that is a challenge for all of us, including school leaders, including the vital role you know as governors, knowing schools, to challenge that.
Just to add as well, one of the first questions that we will ask our secretary heads, teachers and chairs of governors in their first professional dialogue of the year is, how are you prioritising the needs and curriculum approach, teaching and learning approaches to pupils with free school meals? Because we would expect every school to have the highest aspirations and to work towards closing the gap between free school meal and non-free school meal children and young people. Closing the gap data is very difficult to be able to achieve because the cohort changes year on year, but it should be used as a tool for improvement. And there's some brilliant examples, for instance, of I will say that John Frost has an excellent approach to the RADI project, which stands for Raising Attainment of Disadvantaged Young People, and has been highly successful in ensuring that there is very little difference between schools that access free school meals and those that don't. And we're super proud of the work they've done, and it is excellent. And that actually has been shared with other schools, and I can think of 2 other schools in the local authority that have got a similar approach, and I've had those high levels of success. But we never move away from that priority. It is a national priority, a local priority, and it's just critical to equalities really in Wales.
Any further questions?
No, that's all, thanks.
Councillor Marshall?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just off the back of Councillor Harvey's question. Part of it is not relevant to the high school side, but it does link in. It's just about looking at, do we have right interventions from the start of, once we know people from socially deprived areas might be missing on milestones in order to go in, because that affects obviously where they come into the education system, and thus monitoring them, and then the future milestones as they leave primary school into high schools. Do we have the right interventions, or is there more that needs or could be done? Just to be interesting to hear on that point. Thank you.
Interventions naturally would go from very early years education right the way up into the latter stages of education, right up to 16, sometimes into A levels as well. And it's not necessarily just interventions around academic pathways. It's also interventions around attendance, making sure that attendance matters, because we know that has a great impact on pupil attainment. There are interventions for well-being. We support families and parenting at various stages of school life to support family life, and perhaps some of the key milestones that you suggest have been missing. So there are a huge range of interventions. That is all very dependent on the resources available within schools. And one resource which is available is, of course, the PDG funding, the Pupil Deprivation Grant. But that means that the schools that have the highest volumes of free school meals learners would have the highest amounts of funding. And we track the PDG grant to ensure that it has impact on, for instance, free school meal learners, and the right interventions are in place to be able to support those learners. As you can imagine, there are some schools that still have a need socially. It's not all linked to free school meal learners, and they only have a small amount of funding, and that can inhibit their ability to put on all the interventions they would like to. So we have a workforce, we have a set of schools that have the ability, but they are hindered naturally due to their resources. They do their very best, and there is a wide range of practices out there.
Okay, Stephen, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think part of that question was also linked about prior to coming to school and about how we interact with the health boards and things like that. Then is there ways of getting in there early? Because the earlier that we get in to support families, I suppose we become part of that wider community family to help and support to address some of those challenges like attendance and the usage of English or language or Welsh language, obviously in those homes, because the parents might have issues about reading, writing, or even numeracy. So it's about how we get in there and work with other organisations as part of our partnerships overall. But I know there's probably not a whole range of a short answer to that, but I think it's a long-term thing maybe in the background.
Yeah, that's noted, I think. It's just one question I want to ask. A lot of this is focused on free school meals. And if we have a lot of children with free school meals and the schools get a substantial amount of money to support them, but how about those children that come from areas of deprivation, but are just above that free school meal cap? So they're not actually getting free school meals. Are we supporting and measuring them? Because
Welsh Government ask everybody within the education system to prioritise their own groups of vulnerable learners. So each school will be expected to consider who were the vulnerable students, and it will change from school to school. So for one school, it would be largely free school meals children. For another school, it might be children that are new arrivals to Newport and to the UK. Other schools will have perhaps a real focus on children that are young carers that are potentially vulnerable, or those children that are part of the armed forces families that have been frequent movers. So again, within our dialogue within schools, we'll be asking head teachers who they have identified as those vulnerable pupils or those vulnerable groups, and what activities and support they are providing to be able to provide a more equitable education system.
so there are quite a few groups you mentioned there. You didn't actually address them what I asked you about, which was
Right, sorry.
children that are just above
that
that free school
Yeah.
meal level. So they are non-free school meals. Mum and dad may earn £2 or £3 a year, which doesn't push them into it. How are they supported, and how do you identify those?
Well, first of all, I think we'd be looking at our community-focused school interventions is really helpful because it looks at all learners. It doesn't just target free school meal learners, for instance. It recognises that you can be just above a poverty line. And so it would encourage the community-focused schools approach to be able to look at a range of provision to support all learners in a very discrete manner. That's important, isn't it, in terms of things like uniform swap shops, food banks, the fact that we're fortunate in Wales that we've got the universal rollout of free school meals for all of our primary schools, so that actually it means everybody's entitled to that free school meal, which helps families that might be just above that threshold. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought there.
Just to add briefly, in terms of the grant terms and conditions, there is much more flexibility than there has ever been, I think, is the key point. So it's about the local need of schools, to add on to Sarah's points about those group but others, but there's no free school meals, you're not getting this, it's local.
Yeah, it just seems to me that free school meals seem to be the plateau that everybody places this on, and people below it or above it.
It's not as artificial as it may seem as a line.
It's a measure to determine funding, but it's not a measure to determine the children, because your children identified through conversations with families approach to school. A lot of our families are in poverty, not necessarily because of the fact they earn programs. Sometimes it's actually related to their mortgage costs. So you've actually got some areas in our city where people are in poverty because they're actually having to cope with their finances. So that's not measured by those free school meals indicators. You've got schools are very, very aware of those children. They're very much aware of those needs. They're very aware of the vulnerability of those children, those families who are under those sort of stress because they hear their parents worrying. So you see and you're aware of schools where they set up the ELSA support, the emotional literacy, the sort of additionality of support. So it's our teachers knowing their children and exactly what's going on in their lives and picking up those issues and supporting them. So you're using the funding you've got in a broader way to support all those children identifying what those additional needs, because potentially it's going to run in their long life.
Yes, which is great.
Yeah.
But because the funding is linked to free school meals,
Yeah.
there are children that will miss out because they're not on free school meals, and therefore the school will receive less funds.
There is that, but what we also know is that when you look at good monitoring evaluation systems in schools, and you're looking at tracking pupil progress, the reason we track that pupil progress is because we're using that information to identify any pupil that might be falling behind. And that means that any pupil who's falling behind should have the additional support and intervention they require. So that could be small group intervention, if the school has the resource to provide that, or it could be intervention within a classroom where that child would receive extra support to give them the leg up that they need so that they're moving at the right pace. That's one example in the classroom to make sure that everybody achieves. But of course, then there's that extra provision then right across the school, which can come from those opportunities for extracurricular activities, so that where perhaps children are not receiving that at home for whatever reason, or we've got parents who are working very long hours, but they get to have those opportunities. They support families generally, don't they, in terms of childcare as well as the extracurricular activity that the pupil is benefiting from.
I just don't think it's a very fair way to measure it with free school meals. That's my view. Other members have their own views, but I just don't think it's a very fair way to measure it, because not everybody benefits from that. You know,
It's a tough measure, but it's very difficult. The Welsh government are grappling with other ways of measuring.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand
Yeah.
it's not,
Yeah.
you just can't pick it out of a hat.
Yeah.
You have to find some way of measuring it.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of people get left behind because the funding is all focused on free school meals. It all goes there. And then you have, like you said, people who are paying mortgages who are struggling, but are not in affluent areas as such, are not getting the same level.
Sometimes there are differences in child carers in some of our children at some schools. Some parts of the city, for example, they've been speech and CMC, and that's a reality. So to use that money that the schools have got to actually give that child that experience, which is very real, to actually see, whereas in another part of the city, yes, there might be some in-home poverty, but they're still enabling their children to have that experience. What you're trying to do is raise aspiration and equalise opportunity, and that's what you're seeing happening in some of our schools, where you've got that level of deprivation that some children do not leave the estate that they live in unless you're given that uplift and that opportunity. And that's where potentially you'll be using that money to change that.
Good discussion. Good. Right, no more questions at the moment. Do you want to move on, Alan? Anything else, or are you finished?
Entirely up to you. I could briefly introduce elements of the report, just a few key points rather than everything, I would suggest. If that's okay with you, Chair.
Yeah, whatever you want.
Okay, just the key points on 1.3, and we partly touched on this, but it's something that's been missed, that this data comes out at a very strange time, considering it was summer 2024 when these outcomes came in. There is a huge checking process that takes place in the autumn. The final outcome data came out on the 20th of December as a late Christmas present from Welsh Government. Therefore, this is why this report is now. That is not to say that the work has not been going on with schools from the first week of September. I think that's an important point to make. In terms of the data itself, from 1.1 onwards, you've seen those charts. So rather than me go through, unless you particularly want me to, I'm happy to take any questions on the data that remain.
Okay. Are there any further questions from members, or we'll move on? Yeah.
One question, Chair. Is this data live? When is it compiled? When do we likely to have the next data?
Okay. The next data would be at a similar time next year in terms of 2025 data, with that lengthy process through the autumn of checking it's accurate with schools, then it would come out. The data will go live on my local schools at school level and is live there. Schools together at school level.
However, what we also do is in that first month of between September and 2nd of October, all those secretary heads, chair of governors, and we would look at the raw basic outcome, get the checks in place, just to enable a discussion and dialogue about the reflection on some outcomes and the other evidence in the school for the school to be able to talk about its priorities for the forthcoming year. So it's done in a timely way with the local authority. We don't just wait for the data, as Ed said. Otherwise, we wouldn't be making school improvement plans until March, which would be too much of a lag, wouldn't it?
Okay, I can't see any further questions. So is it Ed? Sorry, Ed. Ed, thanks very much for explaining the report. It was a complicated report, but made it much easier for us this morning compared to how I went away after my briefing. My mind was spinning, but thank you for that. I think we've had a really good debate this morning about, you know, where we are, and we look forward to seeing the next set of reports for you. Hopefully, again, in a simplified form, easy to understand for us all. It was your educationalist, and we are. Thank you. Right, are we moving on to, is it Deborah Weston next?
If it's all right, Joe, just
Oh, yes.
confirm the conclusions from
Yeah,
that.
sorry.
That's fine. The only outcome I've got is an update on the accessibility I mentioned. Is there anything else the committee want to note?
So can you repeat that, please?
An update on the reform going through, is it WJC?
The curriculum and exam reform.
Yes.
Yeah. Curriculum exam.
14-16 offer.
Brilliant. Thank you.
We've got some children joining us today. Okay. Are you starting?
Okay. It is a statutory expectation to produce a strategic plan on Welsh education that focuses on our Welsh language development in our schools and communities. This is about our contribution to achieving the Welsh Government target of 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. It's worthwhile noting that our Welsh Education Strategic Plan, when published in 2022, was considered by Welsh Government to be both robust and ambitious. That's thanks to our hard-working officers that are really, really skilled in developing that plan. It's important this plan is regularly scrutinised and considered to ensure that it's transparent analysis, so that transparent analysis is undertaken and provides effective challenge in regards to the targets we have set ourselves and our performance against these. Our annual report to Welsh Government highlights the following: an increased availability of Welsh medium childcare across our city, the largest Welsh medium reception cohort to date, demonstrating an ongoing consistent increase in the uptake of Welsh medium education. A Newport school became the first school in the region to achieve the Gold Cymraeg Campus Award. Welsh immersion provision in Newport was inspected by Estin in May 2024 and resulted in an extremely positive report. And from that has actually developed a film, which is now on our website, to enable parents or children, if they wish to, transfer from an English medium setting into a Welsh medium setting. There's easy steps and process to undertake that, and there's a very, very effective programme. And in fact, children moving from England can actually step straight into following the semester programme into being part of a Welsh medium school. It's a very, very effective process, and Welsh Estin have recognised that. Team Teach delivery is now available in medium Welsh. Our recent Estin inspection also noted the clear articulation of our West, with a clear understanding of what this entails. Within this report, it's clearly outlined what is considered to be exemplary but there was also an honest appraisal of next steps and where further work is needed, which I'm sure you will want to explore further with the education team. And with that, I hand over to them.
Oh, Deb, all your thunder and good news has been stolen.
Can't remember stolen. I don't think, you know, no, honestly, just to say that obviously we did, in preparation for Eston, because progress against the West was actually one of our open questions. So it did come under a lot of scrutiny as part of the Eston inspection. And you know, when we drafted that impact report, we concluded that we had a clear and well communicated strategic vision, which was supported by all partners. Appropriate progress was being made to address the actions and outcomes in the West. Nearly all pupils in immersion centres make sound progress, and through our Sustainable Communities for Learning programme, there's also a strong commitment from the council to creating those additional Welsh medium places to support pathways for future growth. As Cabinet Member has said, you know, we do know we still have areas of improvement. We're only 2 years, well, this is the 3rd year of our plan, and we'll have to write a 3rd year progress report at the end of this academic year. We know, and you know, Eston recognised this as well, that in a majority of English medium schools, Welsh does remain an area for improvement. That is still coming up as recommendations through inspection reports. So we're working with colleagues in the EAS about how we can improve Welsh and English medium schools. We need to actually increase the number of nursery children who are receiving their education through the medium of Welsh, because we recognise that although we've got some early years providers providing Welsh medium early years places, those children are not always transitioning into Welsh medium schools, so we need to bridge that gap. And with our colleagues in preventions and inclusion, with schools and with our early years team, we start to build those links to encourage those children. Once they're in Welsh medium schools, they stay there, but we need to get them in the first place. We also need to increase the number of pupils in English medium secondary schools who've been entered for Welsh second language examinations. We are actually in line with the regional position across our English medium schools. So it's not as if Newport is underperforming. We are performing in line with our partners. We're about 81% of children in our English medium secondary schools are sitting assessed examinations through the Welsh medium. But obviously we want to improve that target because that will support our future workforce needs. And we also need, obviously, just to continue to make sure that we are addressing those recommendations coming out of the immersion inspection. We did have two recommendations in the Eston report. And one of them was around strengthening work to develop the Welsh language skills of pupils in our English medium schools. So I think that shows that we have got good evaluation processes in place, because that's something that we'd actually identified ourselves. Eston didn't tell us that we didn't already know. And we're working with the EAS around specific work in that area, and looking at professional learning for head teachers and staff in our schools as well, linking in with the National Centre for Learning Welsh. So that's just a little bit of a summary of where we are, and I'm happy to take any questions about the West in general.
Okay, do we have any questions? Trevor, anything from you? Me? Okay. Councillor Harvey, I've got a note here. Councillor Marshall.
How are we managing in regards to recruiting Welsh teachers? Because I know it's been difficult. Are we catching up now, or still struggling?
Yeah, so what our Welsh medium head teachers tell us is that where they can plan for recruitment, so kind of now, if they're starting to look at their staffing structures for September, because their budgets are out and they've got their classroom organisation, where they've got time to recruit, they are making good appointments. But the issue is where they have to make short-term appointments. So specifically around TA staff, I suppose, to support children with additional learning needs, then recruiting those TAs at short notice could be particularly difficult. But where they've got time to plan recruitment is good.
Mention TAs. What support is being given to TAs that want to progress to become a qualified?
We've got a Welsh Education Forum is
a group of partners to sit together to problem solve around implementing the West and to make sure that we've got the best possible chance of being successful. And around that table, we have connections with Coleg Gwent, and we have a number of personnel from Coleg Gwent that attend. One of our helpful members is making sure that there are Welsh language teaching assistant courses in the college, and they are encouraging those pupils from Gwent Ysgwyd and our surrounding Welsh medium secondary schools, if they're interested in a career in being a teaching assistant or going on to be a teacher, to access that course. And so we're getting homegrown young people with a passion for education and wanting to help young people and children going into those college courses. That really helps. We've also got the University of South Wales sat around the table as well, and they're able to give us the updates on those NQT teachers that are coming through the college as well. And so, for instance, we've been able to broker arrangements where those NQTs can go and visit our local schools so that they can see where there might be job offers coming up, or they can experience what it's like in our Welsh schools. So that's been really helpful, hasn't it?
Yeah, and they're offering a scheme as well through the University of South Wales, particularly for learners in secondary schools, which is a day in the life of a primary school teacher. So they will take pupils who are interested and maybe take them to a Welsh school and take them through the day so they can build up that level of experience as well. That's a really interesting concept.
The way it was in my mind was the fact that the new Welsh school down Pill, which is just starting now, I think there's about 30, 40 students there at the moment. And obviously that's going to grow.
Yes.
And we're going to need Welsh speaking
Yes.
teachers there.
And the other thing is that obviously for many years we didn't have a Welsh medium secondary school in Newport, so those children will go into Torfaen or go into Cardiff or go to Caerphilly for their secondary education. Now we've got Ysgwyd well established in the city. We've actually got to the stage where children are receiving all of their education in Newport. So those children who are coming out of Ysgwyd are going back then into our primary schools, and they came through themselves want to take teaching assistant qualification. So that supports what Sarah said about that homegrown ethos.
One of the other questions was, how are we actually encouraging parents for their children to take a Welsh school rather than go to an English speaking with Welsh classes?
Yeah, so we've got a becoming bilingual strategy. Our education transformation officer, who sits in the education team, works really closely as well with the corporate Welsh language staff. We make sure that any kinds of events that are organised across the city, we have representatives there talking about Welsh medium education as well. We sit on the regional groups to encourage that. We've also got, as I said, the video that the Cabinet member referred to, which does focus on immersion, but also talks about the benefits of Welsh language education. And we have got a benefits of bilingualism campaign, which we share on our website and in all literature that we send out to parents around starting school. So we include that becoming bilingual documentation as well. We also link in with preventions and inclusion. So they are talking, particularly around flying start areas. So they've got staff engaging with parents at a very, very early stage. We're making sure we're sharing those messages around Welsh medium opportunities.
Final question, Chair, and that's how are we managing to speak to and encourage the private preschool organisations to teach in the medium of Welsh and to encourage them to go on to primary school?
And again, that's work that's being done through our early years team. Our early years teacher advisor has a link with all our private providers, non-maintained settings and childcare settings. So she goes in and they do specific events around Welsh as well. So I know that there was a session a couple of weeks ago where they had somebody that came into that to talk to them about strategies for speaking in Welsh. We've also got as well now in Newport the first full daycare provider delivering provision through the medium of Welsh. That's Wibbly Wobbly, which is down near Tredegar Park, actually, Council Watkins. So we do, so we do have full daycare available through the medium of Welsh. And we will now, once that Gwenlly moves from his current base in Killeen down to Pell, Laura is already establishing links between Wibbly Wobbly and the school, so we can perhaps do videos that we can share with parents to say, you're here now having your daycare through Welsh, this is what the school in the catchment area looks like. So we're trying to build those links as well.
I think in addition as well, the Welsh and Education Forum, which is that large group of professionals from all different agencies, is so fantastic that when we experience an issue around any of the Welsh medium education phases, whether that's the private providers, we get together and try to problem solve. So good examples was when Wibbly Wobbly experienced
They heard
their awful fire. The group got together to see what they could do to support, and one of our English medium head teachers was straight there with their hand up to say, we've got space, we can make sure that there's continuity of provision. I don't believe the space was used ultimately.
No, it was. They took them in there for a short period of time. They took up that offer whilst they were waiting for that new building down at Clepper to be available for them.
And it's about the fact that if you didn't have that continuity provision, it could have fallen down, and that would have been disruptive then in terms of the parents, pupils, but also those parents continuing their Welsh education journey. So
we
it's a
knew
great
it,
group, isn't it, to be able to make sure that we do everything we can.
we knew that there was a building in Torvine that was keen to accommodate Wibbly Wobbly. So for us, it was really keen to keep Wibbly Wobbly in Newport. So when this English medium head teacher put her hand up and said, actually, I've got a room that they could use in the short term, it was absolutely the right thing to do, because it meant that we kept that provision in Newport.
Mr. Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, it's great to hear all this good news about the Welsh language and it being used and utilised in our schools. Do we have enough school places from primary to secondary, or are we still struggling to fit people in?
In Welsh medium, Councillor Harvey?
Yes, please.
No, in Welsh medium at the moment, we have sufficiency of space. And primarily that is because obviously we've opened a new school. Now Gwenlly opened a few years ago. It opened under a seedling mechanism, which means initially we only open for nursery and reception, and that grows incrementally then until they can take children across every year group. It also, when they first opened in Killeen as well, we opened them as a one-form entry arrangement, so maximum of 30 children per year group. But when they moved to Pill, after Easter, we'd be able to increase that capacity to 2 classes per year group. So there is significant additional capacity already created in the city in the primary sector. In the secondary sector, we do have Gwent East Coed, which has a published admission number of 150, so total capacity of around 900. There is significant surplus there at the moment, but it was built to be able to accommodate future growth. However, saying that, because of the very ambitious targets that we've got set out in our West, which mirror what's in our Sustainable Communities for Learning Rolling programme, we know that there will be future expansion in the primary sector over the next 9 years in order to meet our targets. And eventually that will manifest into the secondary sector. So even though there is a lot of space in Gwenlly to the naked, in Gwent East Coed to the naked eye at the moment, we know that we will need to provide further growth over the next 7 to 10 years to meet the demand that's coming through the system. Because we know that we have a history of when new Welsh schools open, whilst they start as small, they grow very quickly. So the mantra we always go with, if we build it, they will come, and we've seen that happen. So we know that we need to provide future growth in the secondary sector, and that's already included in our Sustainable Communities for Learning programme as well.
Lovely. And what about the exams from the secondary schools? Is there a bigger take-up of Welsh language as a vocation in the secondaries, so they can come out actually possibly going back into the education system as a teacher or TA?
Yeah, So at the moment, obviously with Gwent Iscoed, it's still in early days. I think they're in the third year of their sixth form at the moment, but average transition rates from year 11 into year 12 sit at around 50%, which is really healthy considering the size of each year group. So obviously all of their A levels are being undertaken through the medium of Welsh. We are struggling with Welsh as a subject at A level. That doesn't seem to be popular in either English medium or Welsh medium schools. Now, the head teacher of Iscoed tells us that that's because if you do Welsh A level in the Welsh medium sector, it's very literature based and learners are finding it very difficult. So I know that it's not a popular subject, but we're trying to maintain the kind of enthusiasm around that. And in the English medium sector, again, not an overly popular subject, but we are trying to encourage schools to run it as a minority subject to make sure that children who want to study the subject are able to do so. Currently, we have 2 secondary schools offering A-level Welsh second language. And obviously, because of the collaboration model, children from other schools are able to access that provision. They also offer a Coleg Gwent. So any child across the city who wants to do A-level Welsh is able to do so.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Marshall?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I suppose the first question, obviously, is of the base of where we are in Newport in terms of Welsh speakers. We're one of the least Welsh speaking areas, obviously, of Wales because of the history. So it's just basically looking at the Cymraeg 2050 project about 1 million Welsh speakers and things like that. There, we're coming up to the time where it's going to be a young person's journey will meet 2050. It's only 25 years' time in that basis. I'm just wondering, first of all, is there a rough figure that we're kind of aspiring or looking at from a citywide perspective of how many Welsh speakers are being put through the education system before that point at all, to understand what resources and everything that we'll be looking toward?
At the moment, when we drafted our current West, and we started that work early 2020, our baseline figure was that 5% of our cohort would be in, 5% of our year 1 cohort were receiving their education through the medium of Welsh. So our target for 2032, which is the end of this current West plan, is that 11% of our year 1 cohort will be taught through the medium of Welsh. So we're doubling our commitment really, and our plan only goes up to 2032 at the moment. We'll then be required to do another 10-year plan after that. So we don't have targets beyond that, but we are working with Welsh Government to make sure that the targets that are set for each local authority will contribute to the overall Cymraeg 2050 target that they are setting for the country.
Thank you. And I suppose the next question is mainly again focusing on accessibility. Some parents obviously don't go through Welsh language school. They don't have a support mechanism to be able to support the young person in terms of being able to use it, especially as they go up through the school in terms of language. And the other part of the question, I suppose, of accessibility is about provisions in Welsh. So the kind of, the old statement that we hear from time to time about they use English on the playground. What about Welsh on the playground? What about Welsh in, lunchtime clubs, after school clubs? Is an opportunity for English language speaking young people in terms of English medium schools to participate in maybe sports in Welsh and maybe linking in with the schools that way? Is there scope and mechanisms to try and get that Welsh spoken a little bit more, especially from that English medium side across, not saying a full-on education, but just a little bit more immersion within that response in order to maybe even consider even some transfers, even at that stage if possible? Is there a possibility or scope of that?
Yeah, we are trying to do that and working particularly with our secondary schools around incidental Welsh and spoken Welsh as part of the curriculum. So Baysleg School, for example, are taking part in a pilot scheme through Welsh Government, which is called Say Something in Welsh. So basically there is something that is spoken in Welsh at the beginning of every lesson. So Baselig are undertaking that pilot. I haven't had any feedback yet around the success of that. Another thing we're considering exploring, and this came from the head teacher of Ysgol Gymraeg Casnewydd actually, because what I didn't realise until quite recently was that he actually went through English medium education himself, but he studied Welsh second language as one of his curriculum choices, and he actually did work experience then in a Welsh medium school and decided that was the path that he wanted to travel down. So that's something else that I'd like to explore with secondary schools, is whether we can look at those opportunities from those children who are studying GCSE Welsh to put them into Welsh medium primary schools in particular, to see if that's something that we can get started and to develop that interest to go on then to A levels.
Can I also add to that? You asked about parents supporting their children. I was actually in this Ysgol Cymraeg last week, and we were invited into classes where parents were actually having literacy and numeracy lessons in the language of Welsh. So English-speaking parents, but learning Welsh to teach their own children numeracy and equally literacy as in language of Welsh as well. And they were really, so they're running this is the second program they're running, because a new program that they've developed, designed specifically appointed someone to do that role, and it's really, really effective. And the parents are really enjoying it. They're actually given loads of bags of homework to take home and give their children, which is quite interesting. But no, there's positive things happening in all our schools. There's similar processes with all our primary schools.
Thank you for that both. I think there's 2 points I just wanted to raise. I know the point of A levels was noted. I wonder as a committee if maybe we could put forward a suggestion, can the A level be looked upon to see whether or not it could be amended to see if it's more kind of enjoyable or more of a take up. I know with qualifications there's a certain aspect that needs to be fulfilled, but it'd be interested to know whether or not that can be reviewed at all as part of our request, maybe in the background. I'll open up to colleagues in a second if that's a possibility. But I suppose as a local authority locally, I think, we've got the education side that we're trying to do our best, but I think on the scope when we have events out in the community, could we not propose a bit more Welsh being utilised within those events as well, in order to have that scope of saying, we're learning in schools and being more community Welsh, if you will, as a local authority generally across the board, not just in education, in order to back up what we're trying to do within the education scope as well.
I mean, as regards to the community events, I know that there is always attendance from officers from either corporate services or education. Officers from education attended the St David's event down at the riverfront and supported that. I myself went to the National Eisteddfod in Pontypridd last summer, and obviously we have got the Urdd Eisteddfod, which is being hosted in Newport in 2 years' time. That is a fabulous opportunity actually for us to continue to promote and develop the Welsh language in the community. But we will continue to do that, Councillor Marshall, yes.
Thank you. I think you noted about the Welsh language events, particularly that would be spoken at, like the Eisteddfod, which is great. I think there should be other opportunities, like when we have events within the riverfront about carers or anything else like that there. Okay. Is there an opportunity, things like that there, to be a bit more open, because they are some people that might be part of the wider community that might be able to feed back into education and support, community schemes and stuff like that there. So it's just a thing about how we approach this as an authority. I know it's a bit more wide scoped, but it's just a question of whether or not we can look differently.
I think that needs to be referred to the Welsh language officer within Newport City Council. Yeah. I think that we can only work within the constraints that we have within education. I think that goes beyond our remit. Yeah,
I think you have to be careful that you don't put people off going to events, because if people think it's in Welsh, they won't go. So that's what, this is an English speaking area, it's Newport. And we have to be aware of that.
Sorry, Chair, and just to confirm, it's not to have a Welsh language event. What I'm suggesting is we should be more available at events, like have a stall about promoting the Welsh language at a lot more events. We're not currently doing that, and things like that about promotion. If people are happy to use Welsh, it's not advertised a lot for people to see, and you normally have a lot of Welsh speakers themselves say, you know, ble mae Cymraeg. There's a lot of it is English heavy, so it's just whether or not there's options available to say, let's have a stall. Are you interested in, you know, speaking Welsh more in the community outside of the general Welsh events that we're used to?
Yeah, but I think we've moved away from the report now, Stephen. So we just need to sort of park that for now, and that can come somewhere else. We need to stay on focus with the report we have of Welsh in education in our schools and the report that we have before us. Rhys, you want to come in?
Thanks, Jay. It was just on that point, really. I don't think obviously this is a report on the Welsh Education Strategic Plan. We've got a Welsh strategic plan that is more generally around the corporate side of it and events and things like that. And I think if the committee want to refer that to me, I can pick that up with the Welsh language officer and see what we can do as far as a response is concerned.
Thank you, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhys. It would be good to have that link between the two. Thanks, Chair.
Are there any more questions?
Thank you, Chair. Can I come in? I did put my hand up.
I did, sorry, Joe, I didn't. Which council is that? Councillor Cleverly.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. This is in response to what Stephen was saying. Do young people in school, in the Welsh schools, speak Welsh during their play and in sports? I can tell him that they do, because I live right by the Welsh school, Eiffel, and my garden comes onto the back of their playing field. And when I'm putting washing on the line or doing something in the garden, I can actually hear them speaking Welsh, the teachers, when they're playing rounders or things like that. They all speak Welsh in the playing field. And even when they're playing football, the boys are shouting out in Welsh to pass the ball and whatever, you know, just to share that bit of information with you. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, right. No more points? Okay, thank you, Deb, for your report. Can you just hold on before I speak to you at the end? Right. Any outcomes?
Only the more general recommendation about having more of a Welsh presence at events.
But that's going to be referred to these.
Yes, yeah. It won't be under this report.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's fine. Want to address the issues with Sarah now on what we're waiting for?
Yeah, I can go through
we've got some issues
reports.
at the end.
So, in the C committee, we've got a few outstanding actions across the areas in our actions and outcomes reports. They have been chased about. It's just taken a little bit of time to come back. I think Jay wants me just to highlight your actions, if that's okay. The number of hours that English medium schools have timetable for Welsh lessons. One. Neat destination data and drop-off rate. Another. And figures for children who transition from Welsh to English medium provision. From nursery to primary or primary to secondary? I'd have to double check.
Nursery to primary, wasn't it?
Primary.
So we had children dropping out of nursery.
Yes,
Not
yeah, of course.
leaving. Yeah.
And there's one item outstanding, which is the committee's recommendation that officers consider a whole city approach to improve Welsh medium learning and continuation from MITRE into reception.
I think we've had sort of an outcome on today. That's been there, so I think we can park that one. I think we got that. Yeah, we're still live.
At the end, should we have the chat? Of course, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. We just wanted to make you aware so that you can. Okay, so
that's all from me, Chair. Just to say, this is our last meeting of
this year's people committee. And that's why there's no forward work programme included in your packs. But that new forward work programme will be included in the first meeting of the next committee year, if you know what I mean. So that'll be available to committee then.
Okay, well, thank you all very much indeed for attending. We'll end the live record. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Could we have all the heads of service in so we're all up to speed on exactly where we stand as a local authority? Because there's a lot of it's coming through and none of it seems to be joined up. It could just be me, but I would like a meeting with the heads of service so we can all get on the same level playing field, please.
So these are on the outcomes that are missing from what we've asked for.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll ask Sam to look at that.
Yeah, I'm good at that.
And we'll come back to you on that one. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
It will be looked at like that. Okay, can we end the live recording then, please?